Training camp is open in Las Vegas, and I'm going to be straight with you. What's coming out of that facility right now is not what most people expected to be saying this early. The early reports on Fernando Mendoza aren't just positive. They're the kind of reports that make you sit up and recalibrate your timeline for what this franchise might actually be capable of in the near term. There's a lot moving across this roster simultaneously, depth chart battles that are genuinely unresolved, UDFA stories that deserve real attention, secondary competition that's reshaping what this defense could look like, and a quarterback situation that remains the most important and most watched element of everything happening in that building. Let me take you through all of it, starting exactly where it matters most. Mendoza first, because everything else on this roster ultimately orbits what happens at the quarterback position, and what's being reported out of the early days of camp is genuinely worth slowing down on rather than treating as standard training camp optimism. The physical description alone commands attention. 6'5", over 230 pounds, a prototypical pocket passer frame with long arms and the kind of size that allows a quarterback to absorb incidental contact and keep his eyes working downfield rather than bracing for impact on every play. The arm strength is reportedly above what the doubters projected. Not a deep ball artist who's going to put the ball in places that Clint Kubiak's system creates. On time, with authority, at the velocity that makes receivers' jobs easier and defensive backs' jobs harder. The comparisons circulating right now are Sam Darnold's movement and general build combined with the size and frame of Jared Goff. I think that's a useful starting point for understanding what Mendoza is as a physical player, though I want to be careful about how we apply it. Darnold's career is the essential cautionary tale of what happens when an organization throws a young quarterback into a broken situation and expects competitive performance to substitute for developmental infrastructure. The Jets took him, gave him almost nothing to work with, and watched a genuinely talented player nearly drown before the situation finally changed. When the situation changed, when he landed in the right system with the right support, we all watched him become a completely different football player. That transformation wasn't about Darnold suddenly becoming someone he wasn't. It was about him finally operating in conditions that matched what he actually needed. Mendoza is entering those right conditions from the very first day of his professional career. The system is right. The coaching infrastructure is right. The veteran presence around him is right. He doesn't have to survive a bad situation before getting a good one. He's starting in a good one. But here's the thing about Mendoza that I keep returning to, and it's the detail that matters more to me than the physical description or the system fit or the arm velocity reports. He declined a trip to the White House. He is a rookie quarterback. He was just drafted first overall in the entire NFL draft. The entire football conversation was centered on him, and his response to that moment was to stay at the facility, get extra repetitions in, and focus on absorbing the offense. That decision doesn't come from a coaching staff directive. Nobody tells a first overall pick they have to skip a White House visit to go throw routes. That kind of choice comes from inside a player, from a specific understanding of where he is in his development and what the current moment actually requires of him, independent of what would be more celebrated, or more photographed, or more immediately recognized as impressive by the outside world. Layer on top of that what's being reported about his pre-practice preparation. Both Mendoza and center Tyler Linderbaum are new to this organization, learning a new offense simultaneously, building a working relationship from scratch. Before official practice begins, Mendoza is already in there taking snaps both under center and out of the shotgun, specifically to build the timing and communication with Linderbaum that a quarterback-center partnership requires to function at a high level. That connection, the wordless understanding of exactly how the ball is going to be delivered when the center's weight shifts, how the shotgun snap feels under different defensive alignments, takes repetitions to develop, and Mendoza isn't waiting for the practice schedule to start building it. He's out there early, voluntarily, doing work that doesn't show up in any box score, but directly determines how the offense will function when the games are real, and the margin for error has consequences. I want to talk about the quarterback competition honestly, because I think the emotional version of this conversation does a disservice to what's actually a nuanced organizational situation. Kirk Cousins is currently trending toward winning the Week 1 starting job. That's the honest read from what's coming out of camp, and I think it deserves a real examination rather than just a reaction. The argument for holding Mendoza initially isn't a weak one. There's a legitimate school of thought in football development that says the most responsible thing you can do for a young quarterback is manage his exposure to live NFL pressure until the system is fully internalized and the confidence underneath it is genuine and built on real foundation rather than just natural ability operating without sufficient structural support. 15 or 20 years ago, this was standard operating procedure. First-round quarterbacks sat, they watched, they absorbed, they were protected from live fire until the coaching staff had actual evidence of readiness rather than projections of potential. Sam Darnold is the perfect illustration of what happens when the organizational urgency to start overrides the developmental patience required to protect a young quarterback's long-term trajectory. He was thrown into the Jets when the Jets had almost nothing around him, and the accumulation of bad plays, poor protection, and losing environments built compensatory habits and decision-making patterns that took years to unlearn. His career nearly ended before he was 26 years old. When he finally landed in the right situation, what emerged was the player the original evaluation always said was there. The lesson isn't that Darnold was always going to be fine. The lesson is that development timelines require protection to unfold correctly, and organizations that refuse to provide that protection out of impatience or external pressure pay for it in developmental damage that often isn't fully visible until it's already been done. So I understand the organizational logic around managing Mendoza's introduction. I genuinely do, but here is my actual position, and I'm going to be direct about it. If Mendoza goes through the full competitive process of training camp and shows this coaching staff that he is ready to operate in this system from week 1, then the decision has to be to start him. And when you make that decision, you commit to a genuine sample size. I'm talking at minimum 10 games before any serious evaluative recalibration. Not 5, not 3, 10. Because anything shorter than 10 games is not a meaningful sample of what a developing quarterback is capable of. It's a panic window, and the damage done to young quarterbacks inside panic windows is real and documented and consistently underestimated by organizations that don't have the patience the process actually requires. You give him the reps, the games, the genuine organizational commitment that allows growth to happen without a player constantly monitoring the sideline to see if the veteran is warming up because the coaching staff has already quietly made a different decision. That's the difference between what happened to an entire generation of quarterbacks and what should happen with Mendoza. Not whether you start him immediately or wait a few weeks. The difference is whether the organizational commitment is real, whether you actually believe in this player enough to back it up with your actions over time. Let me take you to the secondary now, because the transformation happening in this part of the roster is one of the genuinely underappreciated stories of this entire Raiders rebuild. Jermaine McCollum, the corner the Raiders selected at pick 101, is practicing. The knee is holding up. And the athleticism that made him a consensus first-round prospect before the injury is showing up on the practice field in ways that reportedly justify every bit of the original pre-injury evaluation. There are scouts across this league who believed McCollum was the most likely candidate to be the first cornerback taken in this entire draft class if he had stayed healthy. The Raiders got him in the 4th round. Think about what it means for an organization to secure a player with that kind of ceiling at that draft position, watch him compete in training camp, and see the knee responding to a full workload without restriction. He may not be a week 1 starter. He may need additional time to build back toward where his body was before the injury. But the talent ceiling here is legitimate, and patience in developing a player of that caliber pays dividends that justify whatever the timeline requires. Stokes is another name generating genuine conversation in camp. High-level speed, physical aggression, the versatility to function as a box safety who can support the run physically while also carrying the athleticism to operate in space when coverage assignments demand it. That combination at that position has been a structural problem for this defense for years. Stokes profiles as the specific answer to that problem. And when you step back and take in the full picture of what this secondary looks like right now compared to what it was producing just 2 or 3 seasons ago, when this group was practically a guaranteed touchdown every time an opposing quarterback looked their direction, the transformation is not a small thing. The 3rd and 4th corners on this current roster are better football players than what was starting for this franchise not long ago. Steve Spagnuolo and Clint Kubiak have rebuilt this secondary. That's not optimism talking. That's what the evidence in front of us actually says. And what that secondary improvement means for Max Crosby specifically is something I think deserves more direct attention than it typically receives in this conversation. Crosby has been one of the most disruptive edge rushers in the entire league for years, and he's done it while operating behind a secondary that consistently gave opposing quarterbacks a reason to escape the pocket. When a quarterback knows he can pull the ball down and find an open receiver because the corners behind the pass rush can't keep coverage intact, the pressure the edge rusher generates gets neutralized. The quarterback just runs from it. The stat line suffers. The actual dominance the pass rusher is capable of gets obscured by the support structure's limitations. Give Crosby a secondary that forces quarterbacks to hold the ball, that makes them genuinely reluctant to scramble because they don't trust what's going to happen when they do, and the disruption he creates becomes exponentially more impactful. Great secondaries make great pass rushers look even greater. The Raiders are building that combination for the first time in Crosby's professional career. The wide receiver competition below the established depth chart locks is one of the more genuinely open battles happening in camp right now, and I find it more interesting than most of the coverage has given it credit for being. The spots at the top of the depth chart are settled. Below that, 3 to 4 legitimate roster spots are up for grabs among a group that includes Benson, Thornton, Williams, Rice, and Jackson. Benson is standing out. Quick release off the line, real precision in his route execution, the kind of separation-creating ability that earns a quarterback's trust quickly because the ball going to him reliably arrives where the route concept requires. Thornton has to earn his position. Draft status is not a roster guarantee when other players are outperforming you in real competitive evaluation, and Thornton is being evaluated under exactly the same competitive conditions as everyone else in that group. Williams is the player I find most fascinating in this entire receiver competition, and a significant part of that is the built-in relationship he carries into the building from his time playing alongside Mendoza at Indiana. That pre-existing connection between a developing quarterback and a receiver he already trusts from hundreds of real college repetitions together has genuine competitive value that doesn't always register clearly in traditional evaluation frameworks. The chemistry is already built. The timing is already established. When a franchise is developing a young quarterback, having a receiver in the building who already speaks his offensive language fluently is worth more than pure individual talent measurement would suggest. Williams has shown enough in camp that if the Raiders ultimately stash him on the practice squad, multiple teams are going to be making calls to try to pull him away. That is not a player you lose without consequences. That's a player this organization should be thinking carefully about protecting. The running back picture has a clear structure around it. Mike Washington is the primary back, the explosive, athletically exceptional back out of Arkansas, whose combine profile placed him among the most physically gifted players to test at his position in recent memory. His backup rotation is taking shape behind him, with Himby currently reading as the most likely undrafted free agent to earn a roster spot in that group. Himby isn't going to dazzle you with one elite attribute that makes everyone take notice. He's a functional player across every required dimension: pass protection, receiving out of the backfield, running between the tackles, special teams contribution. That complete functional profile is exactly what a backup running back needs to be to justify a roster spot on a team with real ambitions. Add Hayward at fullback, and the four-man running back group covers every functional need without carrying dead weight at a roster spot that costs the organization competitive flexibility elsewhere. Behind Cousins and Mendoza at quarterback, the competition for the third roster spot is between Clark and Robertson, and the current read from camp has Clark holding the edge. What this coaching staff is clearly prioritizing in that evaluation is system alignment. Finding a quarterback whose approach mirrors what the offense is designed to run, rather than someone whose style would require the entire infrastructure to shift around him in an emergency. Kubiak's West Coast system is built on timing, rhythm, and the specific decision-making cadence that comes from internalizing a route-based, quick processing framework. A backup quarterback who speaks a completely different offensive language introduces risk at exactly the moment backup quarterbacks tend to be called on. Clark fitting the offensive profile matters. The third quarterback spot in a timing-based system isn't just a depth position. It's organizational insurance that actually functions in the scenario it's meant to address. Nicholas Henning, the offensive tackle out of Canada who the Raiders signed after the CFL draft, rounds out the developmental picture on the offensive line side. 6'6", 320 pounds, a prospect who came to football relatively late and is still in the early stages of translating his physical gifts into the specific technical skills offensive tackle demands at the professional level. He is not going to compete for a starting spot in year one. That's not what this signing is about. What it's about is the developmental ceiling embedded in that physical profile. The size, the movement quality, the athletic tools worth investing time and coaching into on the practice squad while the rest of the roster competes for real. The Raiders have demonstrated throughout this rebuild that they're willing to take those kinds of long-term developmental shots at premium positions, and Henning represents exactly that category of investment. Here's the big picture I want you to take away from everything happening in Las Vegas right now, because I think the individual stories are genuinely important, but the larger picture they form together is what actually matters. This roster is different in kind from anything this organization has put together in years. Not cosmetically different, not different in the press release sense, but structurally different in ways that produce durable outcomes rather than just generating a season or two of optimism before the whole thing resets again. The secondary moved from a chronic liability to a legitimate strength in a compressed timeline. The pass rush is anchored by one of the best edge players in the sport who finally has real support operating around him. The offensive system is sophisticated, genuinely quarterback-friendly, and being run by coaches who understand how to build around a young player's development rather than just maximizing short-term performance at the expense of long-term trajectory. And at the center of all of it is a first overall pick who declined a White House trip to throw extra passes, who shows up early to build quarterback-center chemistry before the schedule requires it, and who is demonstrating in the earliest days of camp the specific kind of internal motivation and professional seriousness that separates players who fulfill their evaluations from players who fall short of them. The questions that remain are real. Who starts at quarterback when week 1 arrives? How does the receiver depth chart settle after the final roster cuts? Can McCollum's knee hold up to the full demands of a professional workload? These are legitimate open questions without settled answers. But they're the questions of a team with genuine upside and a clear organizational direction, not the questions of a franchise spinning without a coherent plan for what it's trying to build. The direction is visible, the foundation is real, and camp is producing reasons to believe this thing is actually coming together in the way this fan base has been waiting a very long time to see.